I've been sounding the doom and gloom machine. I've got that siren ramped up all the way with regard to President Obama's upcoming amnesty of 11 million people. He's going to do it. It's going to happen. Just get ready for it. And one of the things that we've always talked about here on the Ben Shapiro Show is, what do we do to stop this? What can you do to stop this? There are a bunch of theories that are in, and it's not just coming from people who are pretty hardcore right-wing like me. George Will is about as moderate as it gets, truthfully speaking, from the right side of the aisle. On Friday, he issued a column lamenting what he called the lawless president. He actually wrote that the threat of executive power is now greater than, quote, at any time since the founders, having rebelled against George III's unfettered exercise of royal prerogative, stipulated that presidents shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. George Will added, quote, institutional derangement driven by unchecked presidential aggrandizement did not begin with Barack Obama, but his offensives against the separation of powers have been egregious in quantity and qualitatively different. Now, there's no question the momentum is growing to do something about the dramatic overreach of the Obama administration, the dramatic overreach of the executive branch. And there are 5 basic solutions that have been proposed. 5 basic solutions that have been proposed, because we do live now in what can best be termed an executive and elected dictatorship. It is. Sorry to let you know, folks, but you're not living in a republic anymore. You're not living in a democracy anymore. You're living in what essentially has become an elected dictatorship. Every 4 years, we elect somebody who then grows the executive branch and impedes more of our livelihood and gets in our way more and more. And it seems that there's no way to stop it, because all the checks and balances are gone. The executive branch in the early 20th century had maybe 100,000 people working for it. We're now up to 3 million people working for the executive branch of government, and it ain't going to stop there. In just a little while, we'll discuss the latest Supreme Court ruling, which once again handed more and more power to regulatory agencies, particularly the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm sure you've heard people talking today about the Supreme Court going after the EPA. Yeah, that's not true. That's a lie. The Supreme Court did not go after the EPA. The Supreme Court helped the EPA, and I'll explain that in just a bit. But this is what happens. The entire federal government is growing and growing and growing at the expense of state government and the expense of individual liberty. So what exactly can we do about it? Well, the first solution that's been proposed is, of course, impeachment. A lot of people saying, oh, well, if we just impeach Obama, that'll suddenly solve everything. Andy McCarthy has a new book called Faithless Execution. We'll have to have him on the program to talk about whether impeachment is indeed the solution for President Obama. But the truth is that impeachment is in all likelihood not the solution. In the history of the United States, there have been a grand total of 19 House impeachments, and just 8 have been convicted in the Senate. Even were President Obama to be impeached in the House, he'd then have to be convicted by 2/3 of the Senate. It's not going to happen. Besides, President Obama is not the whole problem. We have an executive branch of nearly 3 million employees, and no one is accountable. So, okay, forget impeachment for the moment. How about legislative standing? This is what George Will has proposed. He suggested that the legislature should be granted standing to sue the Obama administration. It's a pretty weak case. To allow there's something in law. It's called standing. I can't sue you if you punch Joe. Right? There's a guy named Joe. He's walking down the street. You punch him in the face. I can't sue you. I don't have standing. I'm not involved in the case. Believe it or not, the Supreme Court has ruled that when the President of the United States oversteps his authority, Congress does not have standing to sue. Which is odd, considering that it's Congress's authority that's being challenged. But the Supreme Court has developed what it calls the political question doctrine. And this is an idiotic doctrine that suggests that it's Congress's job to basically handle itself. And if the president oversteps his boundaries, then he oversteps his boundaries, and it's Congress's job to do something about it, not the judiciary's. George Will says that Congress should be allowed to sue on 4 conditions. First, a majority of one chamber authorize the lawsuit, so the House could vote to authorize a lawsuit against Obama, that a private plaintiff be excluded, so you and I couldn't challenge President Obama, it'd be Congress alone, that Congress have no power to repeal the law, and that the injury amounts to nullification of Congress's power. It's those last 2 that are problematic. The courts would in all likelihood find that in most cases of executive overreach, the President of the United States could be checked by the legislature if they wanted to. So the idea of giving the legislature constitutional standing to sue, probably a non-starter. How about constitutional amendments? Mark Levin in the Liberty Amendments has made exactly this case. He suggested that we try to curb federal power by basically calling for a convention based on states wanting a new constitutional convention. All amendments would then have to be approved by 3/4 of state legislatures. Could it happen? Unlikely, given the breakdown of state legislatures. But better shot than constitutional standing, certainly better shot than impeachment, so that should be on the table. I have suggested in my book, The People versus Barack Obama, which is available online on Amazon.com or at your local bookstore. I've suggested that we expand the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act to allow you to sue the Obama administration, or allow me to sue the Obama administration. Make the citizen the guardian of liberty, and the judiciary would then adjudicate those cases. So, Brian Terry's family could sue the Obama administration for Fast and Furious. Ty Woods' family could sue the Obama administration, including former Secretary of State Clinton, for negligent homicide in Benghazi. Charitable organizations could sue Obama for perversion of the law. That would be a possible solution. And finally, state action. And this is probably the one that's most likely on the table. This is states telling the federal government to stick it. Several states have already done this with regard to Obamacare. That doesn't amount to what's called nullification. And this is really where the constitutional pedal hits the metal. Basically, nullification is a situation in which the state government looks at a federal law, says, you're overstepping your authority, go take a hike. The federal government, for example, says that citizens of a particular state should not be allowed to own a certain type of assault weapon, and the state passes a law saying that any federal official who comes on our property, we're going to arrest him. You come here and you try to arrest somebody, we will arrest you. That is a straight-out constitutional conflict. Now, in the history of the United States, nullification actually took place relatively regularly in the first 60 to 80 years of the country. After the Civil War, it was a lot less regular. States did nullify. States mainly nullified the 14th Amendment by instituting Jim Crow laws. But state nullification, because it was applied to racial matters as opposed to liberty matters, has largely been discredited. It may be time for states to start looking at nullifying once again. It may be time for states to start holding the federal government accountable. And if we have to have some conflicts along these lines, would that be anti-constitutional? Sure. But guess what? Constitution is no longer operating. It's no longer in force and effect. There's so many conservatives out there who look at all of these solutions and they say, yes, but what about the Constitution? The answer? What about it? Nobody loves the Constitution more than I do. I adore it. I think it's a brilliant document, but we have not been operating under constitutional guidelines for a hell of a long time in this country. We now have an executive branch that is simply unchecked and unstoppable. We have a legislative branch that doesn't want to do anything. And we have a judiciary that basically kowtows to both the executive and the legislature wherever possible. Any Supreme Court that could declare that the government has the right to force you to buy something, that's not a guardian of constitutional liberties. That's an instrument of the tyranny. So we should be looking, in any case, at any and all solutions to the problem of federal government overreach and executive branch overreach. If we're not, then we're abdicating what the founders gave us, which is a certain level of liberty, which every day seems to be shrinking. So, stand up. Tell your state legislators to stand up to the federal government. Tell your Congress people to stand up to the federal government. And let's mobilize. And let's figure out some solutions. Any and all of the above. Everything's on the table. Because if you don't want to live in an executive dictatorship, now's the time to sound off. And I know there are people out there, well, what if Reagan were president? Doesn't matter. Perversion of the Constitution is perversion of the Constitution. So let's stop pretending that the left or anybody in government cares about the Constitution anymore. They don't. As we continue here on the Ben Shapiro Show, an accused cop killer is about to get a lot of your money. We will explain why. Plus, we will get to, this is truly an unbelievable story. Hillary Clinton said something so unbelievably dumb. You really will not. It really is kind of incredible. We'll get to all of that as we continue here on the Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH, KTTH.com. Okay. Things are getting wild in Seattle. An accused cop killer. Get ready for this. Now hiring a jury consultant. Christopher Monfort apparently believes that his case will be won or lost before the first witness takes the stand. He's an accused cop killer. He's accused of fatally shooting Seattle police officer Tim Brenton and wounding then rookie officer Britt Sweeney in their patrol car Halloween 2009. We're now going to shell out $61,000 for this guy's jury consultant. The defense argues that it's unfair for him not to have a jury consultant because, after all, in a murder trial, you're not allowed to talk about his terrible, terrible past and how he was victimized as a child. You can't do that until sentencing phase. And so they're all upset about that. And so we're all going to have to shell out $61,000 for a guy who allegedly, and I say allegedly because you have to for legal reasons, not because I think that this guy didn't do it, allegedly killed a cop and shot another and tried to bomb 4 police officers, 4 police cars. So that's just a joy. I'm glad we can tack on our taxpayer dollars onto that. Speaking of which, you know how much we pay our city employees? The Seattle PI has a report on it. Seattle City Light CEO Jorge Carrasco is the highest paid public employee. He has a $245,000 salary. He's getting a pay bump to $305,000, which is basically the median income of a Seattle household for an entire year. He's not the only person who's making a pretty substantial amount of money. It turns out that there are a bunch of people who are in the city of Seattle who are doing pretty well for themselves, pretty well. Aside from Jorge Carrasco, Kathleen O'Toole, the police chief, she's going to get paid $250,000. Mayor Murray's going to make $183,000 this year. Shama Salwant is going to take home almost $120,000. She'll take home $117,000. She said in January that she was only going to take home $40,000, and she'll put the remaining money in a solidarity fund. She, of course, still has plenty of money left over. She's not living paycheck to paycheck. Steve Sarkisian, the former University of Washington football coach, he just left to coach at USC. Last year, he was paid $2.6 million. $2.6 million for the coach. In most states, a coach at a public university is the highest paid coach. Washington